he actually took my ribs with his hands. He took my torso and he placed it on himself, and then he embraced me. And to me, that was like too intimate, too soon. Who do you think you are? Sometimes, you take the embrace and there is a little bit more of that breathing into the ear as if there's an arousal situation. That kind of might lead to some sort of moaning or sounds that indicate, once again, what you're feeling. I can remember wanting to partner dance before I even knew what that was. Like, I was maybe 10, 11 when I was suddenly very aware of this very strong desire to dance with a boy, to be on the dance floor while the music is playing, and to be in an embrace. I don't know where I saw this first or was exposed to this idea, but it's really clear to me now, looking back, that it was very much this desire for dancing with somebody in an intimate way versus that being a pathway to more intimacy, which is its own desire that is there. But I think a lot of times we associate any sort of feeling of, let's just call it a turn on or some sort of sensual feeling inside your body. We typically associate it with this context of, on the way to getting laid and, potentially trying to orchestrate an event where you're pursuing somebody, and that's where you would experience those kinds of sensations and feelings. But I think that this drive towards moving with somebody in sync to the music and experiencing this energy of turn on, I think it's more primal. It's more basic, because every species of animal actually has some sort of a mating dance, some sort of a ritual that they go through. And sure, social dancing is not necessarily a mating dance, but if you think about dance, the history of dance, a lot of it has that significance, has that symbolism even. When we're thinking about folkloric dances such as chacarera, it is a mating dance of sorts. So all dance, all social partner dance, in essence, I think is linked to a more primal drive in all of the animal kingdom, including us, for this connection and the experience of the turn on, the sensuality, this thing that we feel that makes us excited to be alive, I would say. And to take it a step further, as humans, we have devised so many ingenious ways of moving together by creating so many different forms of social dance. And there's a spectrum when it comes to the distance between bodies when these dances are danced. If you look at dances like court dances, maybe you watch Bridgerton, you've seen some of the scenes. That idea of these court dances where you have different movements that you do with another partner, that can be considered sort of a sensual dance in a way, but there's a lot of distance between the two partners. And if you think about tango and when it came into being at the time in history, the first quarter of the 20th century, and what people were familiar with at the time when it comes to physical contact with a stranger, that distance between two people closed in, and the embrace got more and more intimate. And if you then look to other dances beyond tango, such as blues or some of the fusion dances that are now coming out of dances like kizomba, for example. There's a dance that is an offshoot of kizomba that I just recently learned about called tarasho. And tarasho, the word itself, actually means screw. And the word itself symbolizes a screw, as in what you would use for screwing into something. And it also stands for sex. And the whole dance actually is extremely close, and there's a lot of undulation of the hips. And I was talking to a dancer who said that tarasho, the aesthetic and the kind of movement that you learn to do, it's like, who is going to be better at turning the other person on? That's sort of the aesthetic, the movement, the quality of the movement. So it's very sensual. It's very erotic in a way. And so you can think of the different social dances that we've developed over the years range in proximity, range in the intimacy that you might experience with someone. But I'd say that no matter how close or how far away you are from the partner, the purpose and the intention is still at its core very similar. At its core, there's still this drive that we can't explain, that we just really enjoy this feeling of being sensual with another person. And when I started tango, I was very easily confused when I started experiencing these feelings for the first time, because in my conventional mindset, I thought that those kinds of feelings are meant to be expressed towards someone that I'm actually romantically interested in. So anytime that I felt that, to me, it meant that this was somebody really special and I really needed to connect with them. And some of that was great, but a lot of times it wasn't so great. And I realized eventually that those two things are not necessarily one and the same. That the sensuality that's in the dance that you tap into when you're sort of in your flow and you're in the music and you're really just kind of in your body in that space is not necessarily indicative of anything else. And that's not necessarily something that beginner dancers who are new to the social dance scene understand. And because of that, because of this nature of the ritual itself, right? The ritual itself triggers us into a state of heightened excitement, connectedness to our more base desires and feelings and sensuality that we all have within us. So our, I guess, drive towards connecting with another person through something like social dance, where we get to synchronize with another person. It's like we're after that feeling on some level. Now, when we start talking about sensuality as expressed in the dance, and the question becomes, what is an appropriate level of sensuality for a particular dance in general? And what is an appropriate level of sensuality for you individually as a dancer? Some dancers dance very sensually with a lot of expression and a lot of embracing of that energy, and you can see it, you can feel it perhaps from them. And some dancers are very different. And I've been on many, many sides of this equation, so I can't say for sure which one is the right one. I think it really depends where you're at in your dance. But I think we get in trouble when we think that there is a way that it's supposed to be out there, and that there's like an authority that's going to enforce that way, that there's a standard that's going to be protected, and that someone out there is going to draw the boundaries for someone else. But that's just not the way it works among people, especially in the context of social dance, especially when we're playing with some of these other areas of our minds and our bodies. So it's not going to actually be as controllable as we want it to be. In the years that I've been dancing, I haven't really seen a successful way that a tango community figured out what to do to prevent some sort of boundary crossing at some point. Right now, as a dance form itself, I think tango is very special in how it developed, so that there is a level of sensuality that we all experience and we tap into, but it's not as much as what you see in other dance forms. So for me, as a dancer, when I watch dancers who do kizomba or who do dances like tarasha, when I watch it, I see it and I'm like, oh my God, that's so intimate. Like it makes me blush. No, it just makes me, I guess, aware of how dirty dancing it is. You know that scene from the movie Dirty Dancing when she comes into the room with the watermelon and Patrick Swayze's there dancing in the crowd and everybody's sweating and dancing and gyrating against each other. You know, it kind of looks like that. And I used to be the kind of dancer who wanted that a long time ago. But over the years, I kind of tried different styles of dance, and I experimented with blues and fusion and some of the other African derived dance forms that do have a bit more of that hip gyration motion, I would say. And it was fun, but I realized that on the spectrum of the type of embraces that exist in social dance, I just kind of fall into this particular section that is expressed through tango, where there is some experience of that energy, but the container of tango actually resists too much of it. As an aesthetic, tango developed in a different way from other dance forms, possibly, I think, because there's no percussion. If you notice, anytime there's percussion, we as human beings, we just want to wag our tails. We want to sway our hips, right? I mean, even animals want to do that. When you hear a beat that's coming from drums or something percussive. But tango doesn't have that. And so we don't have the desire to sway our hips in tango. When I'm talking about the music, right? Like the music is not really creating that sensation in our bodies for that movement. But then also the actual instrumentation of the songs is a bit more classical. Like when you listen to the music, it's more classically driven and classically related rather than like jazz. And there are jazz elements for sure, but there's a different quality to it that creates a desire to move in a different way. And the dance itself over the years has evolved to make it look more like it's two people who are dancing ballet together. Not that it's that technical, but it's closer to like a ballet kind of aesthetic than it is to African dance aesthetic, which if you look at dances like kizomba, tarasho, African dances, you can see that the aesthetic is very different and it's driven by a different part of the music. It's driven by the rhythms. So with tango, you have this very special situation, I would say, because the dance sort of has a self-correcting mechanism in it when compared to other dances. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the tarasha type dance that's super sexual. And if you want to see it, I have a link in the show notes that you can see an example of what tarasha looks like. So on the scale from 1 to 10, if tarasha is like 10, then I would say tango is more like a 3 or a 4. And a 1 being like, I don't know, chacarera type of dance, where it's like there's not much contact. It's just sort of like play and you're sort of, around each other, but not like up close and personal. So tango is sort of like 3 or 4 in my mind. Sometimes it could be a 5. But as a dance itself, from just the outside, the level of sensuality allowed in the dance and shown in the dance, I would say is not as much as in other dances. Now, if we're looking inside tango, and if you're asking yourself, well, then what is appropriate? Because even though tango doesn't have that much sensuality, still, when you look at performances or just observe some of the marketing for teachers as they promote themselves, a lot of times they're posing in very provocative shapes with women's legs being wrapped around the man, and she's bent over and he is kind of on top of her. So it's very provocative, sensual poses. So you might think, oh, that's tango, I'm supposed to dance like that. But you'll notice at a social event, at a milonga, I would say not many people dance like that, right? There are some perhaps, but this is where you start wondering, like, what is appropriate on the social dance floor? What is too much? What is not enough? And maybe even thinking of it practically, like when you take an embrace with someone for the first time, what do you feel is okay to experience? Now, I'll tell you what is my current list of what I would say is not appropriate sensual behavior, with a little caveat. The caveat being that I've done almost all of these things at one point or another myself in a context of being with someone that I really wanted to connect with on that level. So ultimately, you will have to figure it out for yourself, whether it's appropriate or not to display these behaviors, knowing that maybe sometimes it is. But I would say 9 times out of 10, if you were to take an embrace with somebody you've never met before, and you were to do one of these following things, I would say they would be considered too sensual, too fast. The first one is breathing with your mouth open in that way that indicates that you are in a state of sensual enjoyment, if you catch my drift. So there are people who just breathe through their mouth as a habit, which is annoying in general. I would say, please don't do that. Most followers really dislike it, especially if they dance with a leader who's taller than them and the mouth is like right in the ear. But sometimes, you take an embrace and there is a little bit more of that breathing into the ear as if there's an arousal situation. That kind of might lead to some sort of moaning or sounds that indicate, once again, what you're feeling. And I would say it's a fine line because sometimes it's like a compliment, sometimes somebody might take you in an embrace and they're like, that feels so good. Like this is great. I'm enjoying myself. So that might be fine. But there's this other type of embrace, moaning kind of experience that's a little bit more aggressive, that you can feel that the other person's really experiencing something deeply, and you perhaps might not be ready for that. Or maybe you are. Again, that depends. Now, I'll say one more element that has to do with the mouth, and it really does need to be mentioned because I've heard enough complaints about this that I'm sort of surprised that it's kind of a big deal. But any kind of licking or biting on the ear or the neck, anything like that is not okay. And I'm kind of blown away that it happens as often as it does. I remember I was at a marathon here locally, and there was a woman that I had invited to come to this marathon to dance for the first time. She was a beginner. She had never attended a milonga even. And I convinced her to come to this opening night milonga. So it was not a big deal. It was very casual and very friendly. And I checked in with her halfway through the night. And she said that she was having a great time, except for this one guy who started biting her ear and like licking her ear. I couldn't believe it. So that kind of thing is just not okay. Not okay, especially on the first dance. So if you ever experience that, please take this as your permission to just walk off the dance floor. And that goes for leaders too. I mean, most of the offenders in the social scene, whatever dance form you go to, whether it's tarasho or tango or salsa or kizomba or any other dance, most of the offenders are men. That's a fact. However, there are times that it's women who overstep and are too provocative, too sensual. And granted, I've only spoken, I think, definitely to one, maybe two men that have shared this with me, that they've danced with some women who are just kind of over the top sensual and cross the line a little bit. But neither of them minded it, which is kind of funny. So that's just goes to show. So the context matters. And if you are experiencing something where you're like, I'm not sure I'm okay with this, then you have the permission to just walk away, whether you're a leader or follower. Now, the next thing is when it comes to the actual touch of your hands on your partner. We spend a lot of time talking about quality of the embrace, and a lot of times the discussion revolves around the frame and the shoulders and the tone of the arms, but not often do we actually talk about the hands. And there's either a lot of fear around touching someone, or there is too much entitlement, I would say. So when it's too much entitlement, what does that mean? Sometimes when you take the embrace and the leader starts doing something with their fingers on your skin, or they are groping or squeezing parts of your body that you're not expecting. It might be something very intimate, like bringing their hand on your neck. This is something that might actually be like super triggering for people. There's also, this has happened to me only once, and honestly, I dislike this so much that I never dance with this person again, even though he was a fine dancer. But it really bothered me that he did this. And all it was is before we took the embrace, he actually took my ribs with his hands. He took my torso and he placed it on himself. So it's with both of his hands around my ribs. He sort of placed me on top of him, and then he embraced me and we took the embrace. And to me, that was like, no, not appropriate. Too intimate, too soon. Who do you think you are? And to this day, I'm not sure exactly like how to articulate what's wrong with it. But the only way I can really answer it is by asking, would you ever do that to another dude? Like, can you imagine as a guy coming to another guy Or as a follower, like, can you imagine as a follower coming up to a man and taking his ribs and like placing him where you want him to be? Like, that would be really weird, right? It might not be bad, but it would be weird. And I feel like this is that kind of place where it's like, that's entitlement. Like, you don't have the permission to just take my body in this way. That's kind of how I felt. So the hands, where you place the hands, how you touch someone, you know, we're very sensitive. So when I first started dancing, I think I was game for anything. I wanted it all because, you know, it was all new. And I wanted the sensuality. I wanted the romance. I was single. I wanted the one night stand. So I felt okay about having this kind of play with someone. But eventually it starts kind of wearing on you. And once the novelty wears off, it becomes a little bit more of a chore. So again, it's something that you have to watch in yourself and allow it to change as you grow as a dancer. Now, the last thing I'll mention is when it comes to leg wraps. I would say anything to do with splitting the woman's legs and having your leg as a leader between her legs close to her crotch, that positioning I feel is not appropriate for a first dance with a stranger. Granted, these moves are some of the first moves you learn in tango. And I do think it's a huge disservice. I don't know a way around it because even I, as a leader, I remember learning ocho cortado as a leader. And the next move I learned was the leg wrap. But I never lead it on the social dance floor. I might lead it once during a whole milonga with somebody that I really know, my friend Eve, somebody who I've been dancing with for a long time. I very rarely even think about using a leg wrap with somebody that I just met. Not to even mention the fact that if you're listening to the music, there are not that many orchestras and not that many songs where a leg wrap is that called for. You know, like songs that really scream leg wrap. There's actually not that many as what you see on the dance floor when you're watching for leg wraps. There's a lot of leg wraps going on, and it's not really in the music, but that's beside the point. When I take an embrace with a leader that I've never danced with, it's really interesting to clock how many of them will go for leg wraps almost immediately, almost within like the first 5 steps. We haven't even walked for 10 seconds and there'll be a leg wrap and another one and another one. And there's a little bit of this feeling of he's thinking, oh, she could do this one too. Oh, what about this one? What about that one? And it's like, if the leg wraps are not happening, then they try even harder. And some of the leg wraps also lead to some kind of off-axis movements. So the whole dance is kind of more about this prowess that they're trying to show and a conquest. It feels like a conquest. Now, sometimes it might go even further than that. And you might be dancing with somebody, they're leading the leg wraps to such an extent that you then feel that they have a hard on. And they're kind of using the movement to make sure that your thigh ends up rubbing against that place. I know it sounds extreme and it sounds gross, perhaps. You might be cringing, but that's what social dance is about. I'm sorry. I mean, I know it's not about that for us rational human beings, but that's what it's about at its kind of primal level, and it's there. It's there. It's not going to ever leave, because young men will always exist, because we always are going to feel that way. Like, as dancers come in, as they get introduced to tango, we all go through these feelings where tango is about this party atmosphere, and it's about the turn on and hooking up with somebody. For many people, that's what tango is. Now, granted, most people would say that tango is not the greatest place to hook up. If you want to really hook up with someone, go to salsa or go to something easier. Nonetheless, I do know that there are dancers who end up on the scene and they have a lot of success with being able to connect with people, and they take advantage of that. So, I've danced with dancers both who have revealed their hard-ons in the dance, and then at the very end of the dance grabbed me and kissed me with, tongue and everything. Never met the person in my life. So that is possible. That is possible. Now, again, what's important is, where do you need to draw the line? Where does each dancer need to draw the line for themselves? Because ultimately, nobody can really speak for you. They can't protect you. They can't predict or prevent something from happening. There are always people who are pushing the boundaries and going for it and trying to get what they want when it comes to the sensuality part of it. And I definitely think it's a spectrum that we move back and forth on. Even day to day, you might kind of feel yourself in different places around this issue. When I was in Buenos Aires for 6 months, I had a dancer friend that we felt a lot of chemistry for each other. He wanted it to also continue off the dance floor, but that's where I drew the line. And on the dance floor, though, it was epic. It was like we were inseparable. And like that couple that doesn't separate when the cortina plays, and they just stand there and they're breathing together and just swaying, and like that whole thing. It's kind of cringy. I roll my eyes at it now when I see it. But I was totally in that state. I would stand with him and we would just breathe together, and then we'd start dancing again. We danced like 3 or 4 tandas in a row. And it was fabulous. It was so fun. I loved all of it. But over the years, eventually I kind of lost interest. And I haven't really danced with him in a long time. And eventually, I really wasn't open to that kind of dance anymore. And he probably could tell. So there was like a mutual parting, I would say. So for me, that phase of like, oh, this is like so hot, and oh, this guy's so turned on, and I'm feeling a lot of like that juicy, passionate energy. Eventually that transformed and evolved and changed into something else. And whenever now, if I feel that kind of energy from someone, I just sort of gently separate myself from it, not because I think it's wrong, but because I'm not there. I'm not matching that person in their energies. The main point is that you have to change with time, and you will, and that's okay to want something different. It's okay to say no to something that you used to like, or to say yes to something that you've previously thought was not for you at all. It just depends on what it is that you want at this moment in your dance. And no matter what you do, your boundaries are going to be tested in different ways until you decide for yourself what you want, what you're okay with. So don't get disillusioned if you somehow observe or experience for yourself a testing of some sort of boundary where somebody disrespects you or does something that makes you feel violated. Don't allow that to derail you, because that is just an opportunity for you to say to yourself, oh, that was too far. From now on, I know. I mean, for me, I had to figure this out for myself over a period of years. It takes time. So whenever I didn't have these clear boundaries and I didn't really know what I was okay with, I said yes to a lot more. I pursued connection and I pushed for more experiences of sensuality. And those experiences led me down different pathways that eventually I was like, you know what? I actually don't want to go that way anymore. Turn around, change my mind, go somewhere else. So in terms of what is sensual, too sensual for you, or just sensual enough, like those questions have to be asked every time that you feel that there might be some sort of a chemistry between you and another person, right? Anytime that you feel it, it's an open invitation to a certain degree from the other person. If you feel it, if you feel they're sort of really into you, and it's your responsibility to decide whether you're okay with it or not. But also realize it's okay for you to go there, because just to reiterate the point I was making at the beginning, is that this feeling of sensuality and turn on does not need to be linked to this other realm of turn on. It does on the basic level, because as I said, when we first started to experience these emotions and sensations, it all feels like it's one thing. But now, having danced for this many years, and especially when I started leading and I started dancing with women with whom I don't have any chemistry that I would have with a man, because I'm straight. And so I don't have that element to color my vision, but I would experience just the same deep level of sensuality. And I started having this realization, oh my God, it's the same thing. There it is, this turn on, this like vibe, this jiving with the other person. And it's not even about that the other person is somehow turning you on. It's more about that you yourself feel turned on by the way you are moving with this person. Like it's more of that feeling of observing and enjoying yourself in the context of the other person, rather than directing your affection towards the other person. So it's a different place that this feeling comes from. And I would say it's very much of an evolution that we live through as a human species, as animals. I think it starts in a place of this mating dance. And as we use that energy for connection, for growth, then it becomes more and more refined over time. Like we distill it further and further to the point where now, you know, it is possible for me to think, oh yeah, this belongs in this box. I can take an embrace. I can have a really steamy tanda with this stranger, like we've been together for a decade and we're lovers from another lifetime. Like I can totally have that. And then I say thank you and I walk off the floor and I go back to my husband. And my husband can have the same thing. He can have another woman in his embrace and they might have this like amazing moment of connection and intimacy, and then that's done and he comes back to me. And it's not like, I know this is something that might come up for people who are involved in relationships whose partners are not dancers, and it's a very scary place for people to consider that their partner, their loved one, might have some sort of deep experience with someone else. It feels very vulnerable and very scary, very alarming. But I think what helped me to get past that is just, again, to see in my mind's eye the difference, to understand that they're two different places. They don't have to be the one and the same. What he's experiencing with that person and what I'm experiencing with my partner is not the same thing as us being together intimately in a relationship and having that connection. Like there's nothing to even come close when it comes to comparison of that kind, of that magnitude. Now, to wrap this up, I want to ask you a question. It's been my observation that most of the time, either I meet people who say that they've never had any experience of their partner crossing the line and being overly sensual and violating them, or I've met lots of dancers who say that they have felt violated and have been in quite a few very uncomfortable situations where their partners cross that line. So I'm curious, what is it that has helped you perhaps be so resilient and have your boundaries intact so well that nobody has ever dared to cross them? Or what has helped you create those boundaries over the years? What have you learned that has been helpful for you to draw those boundaries and ask for that respect that you deserve? I would love for you to share in the comments or send me a DM over Instagram. You can reach me at IMSO Tango, IMSO Tango. And if you haven't done so already, please join my private Facebook group. On Fridays, I go live in that group and we discuss these issues in real time. So we'll be talking on this particular issue on Friday. So if you want to join, you can click on the link in the show notes. Until next time, ciao.